Hey, it's Luke without a darts. Today I'm really excited to check out the Adventure Force Maxim Pro. This is the coolest new blaster to hit the hobby, and there are so many fun surprises in here that we're going to talk about. But what I'm going to do today is show you how to upgrade your cage, your wheels, and your motors on this blaster while keeping the stock wiring. This is probably going to be one of 3 videos because we're also going to do another video on how to install a solenoid for a semi-auto solenoid pusher. And then we're also going to do a video showing you how to install the worker full auto kit. But this is the basic version of the video that just shows wheels, cage, motors. Before we get going any further, I want to mention that this is a LiPo battery upgrade. Please read all the instructions that come with your charger, your battery, and check out our page that we will link down below. LiPo batteries can be dangerous if not handled correctly, so please keep that in mind. We do sell a little mod kit for this. It is pretty basic. It includes a 3D printed cage, and then you're going to get a pair of day brakes. These are our favorite wheels on the shop, as well as a set of Kraken motors. You're also going to get 2 small pieces of wire to bridge the motor terminals. Also included in the kit are 4 M2x5 cage screws. And we're going to include 2 little soldering spacers which go on the back of the motor cans, and they just simply make soldering a little easier for those that are newer to soldering. They are certainly not required. As far as tools, it's a pretty basic set. You are going to need a soldering iron, solder, helping hands are optional but very helpful, eye protection, a spudger or other pry tool can be really helpful. You could use a flathead screwdriver if you have a small one as well. Number 2 screwdriver, a number 1 screwdriver. Not 100% required, but we really do recommend blue thread lock for the cage screws. Wire strippers, although you could get away with an X-Acto blade to strip wire. Always handy to have a small pair of needle nose pliers and a pair of snips for cutting wires. Optionally, you could use an electric driver. If you're ever using an electric one, make sure you get one that has torque adjustment. Don't use an actual power drill or you will strip out your screws. Without further ado, let's get going. We'll start by removing the components we don't actually need for the mod, such as the stock and the sights. Then we'll go ahead and take our number 2 screwdriver and get our battery door removed. Inside, you'll find a AA battery tray. If you put your batteries in, go ahead and remove them. And then we've got 1 screw hiding down in there, which looks to be a number 1. Now, I really have to thank Dart Zone for what they've done with this blaster, giving us a moddable platform out of the gate with a lot of great options, and this little first surprise, an XT30 connector. And that's what makes this one of the easiest mods I've ever done a tutorial on, because you already out of the box can simply plug in a LiPo battery and unlock. So today we're really just going to focus on upgrading the cage, wheels, and motors because we want it to be a little bit quieter and we want it to be a little more accurate, and it will spin up much, much faster with those Kraken motors. Now we're going to go ahead and split the 2 shells of the blaster out. So we'll go ahead and remove every single screw. From Perry's memory here, these are all the same size screw. Note, you don't have to remove these 2 screws here on the rail. There's always that last screw you just didn't find on the first pass. Once you've got all of the screws removed, you can go ahead and actually pull the 2 halves of the shell apart. And we can set this aside for now. I'm actually going to remove all of the screws from it and keep them together so I'm not hunting for them later. My little bottom safety from right here did fall out. I'm going to set that aside and come back to it at the end. I will remind you in the video. Sometimes it's easier not to try keep those parts in place. It looks to me like the mag release assembly is going to stay fine, and we're not messing with the trigger on this one. We're keeping all of this back half the same, so we're good to continue on here. Normally I'd pull out this muzzle and rail, but I'm actually going to leave those right in place because it doesn't look like they're really going to be in our way since we are not messing with the wiring behind this line right here. Now we're going to go ahead and pull out our cage by removing these 4 screws. More torque. Anytime I find a screw that's causing me issue, I really take my time with a new screwdriver, apply a lot of pressure, and go slowly. That allows me to take this half of the cage off. You can set that aside, and then I can pull the entirety of the cage out like that. Now that I've got that loose, I'm going to pivot the body. I'm going to keep this all attached there, and I'm just going to bring this down here away from the bottom of the blaster so I can work on it independently. Note that my back strap rev did fall out. I'm going to set that aside and I'll remind you to put it back in later. So these are PTCs, which are essentially a resettable fuse that clamp down when there's a stall or too much current or something that might damage the blaster. The downside to these is that they are not rated for our higher output motors. So we are removing this safety device. Keep that in mind. If you jam your blaster, you are likely to burn out both motors very easily. As a retail product, Dart Zone puts these in because they protect the blaster. I'm opting to not reuse the PCB. However, if you wanted and you carefully desoldered just the 4 motor terminals, you should be able to get this off and reuse it. Anytime you're desoldering, it's usually easiest to apply a little bit of solder as you're pulling it off. And I just like to apply a little bit to the tip and work it off like that. Very important to wear eye protection here, because pulling boards off things is a good way to flick solder into your face. There we go, so we've removed that PCB. And these PCBs don't look like they have a whole lot on them. Now you could bypass the PTC by soldering those 2 terminals together, or by simply twisting and then adding some solder there would be fine. That's probably the easiest way to do it. It can be really problematic and difficult for those that have dealt with PCBs to get this onto the motor terminal while melting it and getting it all in place. It can be a little bit challenging to do that, so I'm going to show you the other way to do it instead. So I'm going to go ahead and snip our main 2 wires here. After snipping them, I'm going to strip off a 1/4 inch off the end of each. Maybe 3/8, somewhere in there is just fine. Next, we're going to set up our cage and get this all ready to go. So first, we're going to take our actual cage itself, flip it over so it's like that, and the placement should be alternating just like that. And it should match the dot position on your stock cage, looking for this end to be the same. Your cage may look slightly different than this because we may tweak this a bit more to make it the easiest fit possible. Now that I've got those motors placed, I'm going to flip this over, supporting it on the other side, and I'm going to install 4 of the screws. Now on each screw, I'm going to apply just a single drop and then thread that in. You can tighten these down firmly, but don't wrench on it. You should not have to apply any force inward as you're pushing them in place. If you have any excess, go ahead and wipe that off. Blue thread locker doesn't interfere with PLA cages that we ship. Those screws should be flush or past flush when you're looking at the top of the cage. They should not be protruding in any way there. Now we're going to install our actual flywheels. To do so, we're just going to push this on as firmly as we can, and we always want to support the back here without damaging the delicate motor terminals. And essentially, we're trying to go until those 2 semicircles line up and we're just as even as possible. If you are pinching by hand, it can help to just put a little piece of something there so you can push against. But the key is when you get installed, you want your 2 wheels to be as lined up as possible. And that's looking pretty darn good. If you find that one is out of alignment, you'll want to shim up or work one wheel up or the other wheel down, but you want them to be as close as possible. I wanted to point out a couple things just so you'll know if you get this kit, your things look a little different. The first is that there are 2 catches here. The bottom one is the only one you need for anything that's Talon compatible. The top mag release is for some of Dart Zone's older mags, which they don't make anymore from what I understand, and it's also for Katana, which are pretty outdated and not used as much anymore. So if you don't plan to use those, you can take this out. It'll gravity drop your mag probably a little bit easier because you only really need that one. Additionally, you'll notice that I have cut and modified this cage a little bit. The cage that we will ship with this kit is going to be different than this one. It's not a stock strife cage, but it's worth noting that if you do take a random strife cage, like a worker metal cage or something, you'll need to actually verify that the alignment works and everything doesn't collide. So you'll see here, I've got a little bit more cutting to make this fully compatible, but that's just because I took the off-the-shelf strife cage. The one we'll ship with this kit will be more custom for this blaster. Additionally, if you are using a cage other than the custom one for a Maxim, you are going to have to do a little bit of fit and trimming. You want to make sure that all 4 of your screw bosses here connect with the actual spots on the cage and that they're all the way touching. In this case, I'm actually going to carve out a little bit here with an X-Acto blade just to make sure it fits depth-wise. But you should not have to do this with the cage we will ship to you. Additionally, I am going to take this muzzle piece because it's going to collide with my cage here. I will design this cage to take the full insert because there is enough room as far as I can tell. However, if it doesn't, you can simply take this center piece out entirely or cut this off flush there. I'm going to go ahead and take this part out, and I'm probably just going to omit it entirely, but you also could trim it to fit depending on if you had a different cage lying around. Maybe you took a cage out of another blaster, but this part here, all you would need to do is cut off the end here, and you could do that with virtually any cutting tool. We get a lot of questions about B-cars in flywheelers because it looks like you could fit a B-car in here. I have yet to see a reliable system where the accuracy is increased and where I feel like the reliability is also good. So let me know in the comments if you've had good luck with a B-car flywheeler at any point. Now we'll go ahead and wire up our cage. Keeping in mind I've got the blaster up here so I can route these wires down the way I want. We're going to take our 2 solder spacers and we're just going to drop these on the terminals. These just prevent excess solder from touching the motor cans. It's the #1 problem we see. They are not required. If you are experienced in soldering, you'll have no problem here. But we have found they save a lot of burnouts and other problems, because if you have a little bulb of solder, but the solder is connected well to the terminal, this saves you. Next, we're going to take our 2 wires, and this is the front of the blaster, so the dart goes that way. The front is positive, so we're going to take our red positive lead, and we're just going to kind of thread it into the little hole on the terminal there. It may pop out on you, and this is where it's going to be a lot easier to use your helping hands. Now we do need to bridge this terminal with that terminal, so we're going to do that with a small piece of wire. So again, we can take that and we will strip it. Give that guy a little twist as well. And we can kind of look at our approximate distance. You want a little bit of tension relief, but it doesn't have to be overly long. Just to make life easier, so those are held in place, I'm going to go ahead and solder these 2 bottom terminals. After you've done those first 2 motor terminals, then you can go ahead and insert these wires from the other side, and we're going to attach both of these wires together ultimately. So if you can get them both in the hole slightly from either side, it might look a little messy, but it'll be all right. If you wanted to, you could replace all the wire, of course, and re-solder the whole thing, but I figured we might as well reuse the great wire that Dart Zone has given us in the blaster. You don't have to have both wires pushed through the actual terminal. I'm essentially just resting this one next to the other, and we'll connect the whole thing together with solder. And then at this point, I always like to give my wires a little tug, make sure that everything's looking good, everything's fully fluxed, and this looks just fine. Now that we've got this all set up, this is actually a good time to test your blaster. And so what I would suggest is, if you have the AA's around from your original pack, go ahead and take that, because it's lower current. It's going to be less dangerous on your upgraded motors in case you do have something wired incorrectly. It's a pretty easy wiring job here we've done, but it's always a good idea to test. So I'll go ahead and plug the AA pack in, not my LiPo yet. And we'll just kind of hold this in place, minding your fingers, and we'll rev by pushing the switch back here. Oh, I was like, why does it sound funny? Oh, it doesn't have a LiPo connected to it. And a great thing to do at this point is to rev it up, and then a dart should fire through it. Now that we've tested the motor alignment, we can actually go ahead and put our cage back together, and then we're pretty much to the end of this. You'll want to get your cage in place first. Once that's dropped into place, you'll want to find your 4 screws that you lost and put them back in there. In my case, they were still sitting in this little cage, so that's perfect. So we'll put all 4 of those back in. Now that we've got the cage screwed in, we're going to go ahead and just push these wires back into these nice little guides. You gotta love that, Dart Zone. Thank you for these instead of like tape or other nonsense. They're just perfect little wire traps there. I can just use my screwdriver, and it should look, when you're done, something like that. Really nice and easy. There's lots of room there. It makes life so much easier. At this point, we are ready to put back our mag releases and all of our internal bits. I'm gonna go ahead and omit this one, but you can do so or not, depending on your preference. Then we're gonna put our back strap rev back in the back. We'll take the actual mag release here. That should be good. Double check that it functions. And then our safety mechanism in the bottom. And then everything else will pop out while you do that. That's pretty much normal modding. These parts can be a little tricky to get in their places properly, but I wanted to show you up close here what they look like when they are back in. Same over here. You've got your mag release, your paddle, and then the one I omitted, which would go right there. Note, make sure you get this trigger pin back in the trigger assembly for the pusher. Now we can close up the blaster. Feed your little X330 through here, and you're going to put the whole shell back together. Now that I've got that all back together, I'm going to go ahead and put all the screws back into the shell and screw them in. And now we've completed it. We are ready to fire this blaster. It's worth mentioning that Krakens are not gonna run very well on AA's, so it's really not a AA blaster after you've done this. They're just far too current heavy to work properly. You might be able to get away with this pack that came with the Omnia Pro, but do know that it's still gonna be a little less current. It might be pushing this pack a little harder than I would like. So a proper LiPo is always going to give you the best performance, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my LiPo alarm. We're all green, that means we're good to go. Plug in, and one of the other best things they did with this blaster is there's just a ton of space. Ton of space, huge battery door included. Dart Zone, nice work with this blaster. Ooh, needs a thumb screw. We have those on the shop as well. But now that I've got that all assembled, let's go ahead and fire it at Perry. You gotta love when one bounces back and hits you in the head. That's great. That was a very successful mod, relatively easy, pretty easy to do and put together. Hope this has been helpful. We're gonna do a lot more on this blaster because it's clear to me that aside from some of the oddities like this backstrap rev, which are hit or miss depending on whether you like it or not, I've come to not mind it so much, but I think this is going to be a really popular platform. So in the works are a full auto mod guide and a mod guide on how to use a neutron solenoid as a pusher. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm out of darts.